Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast, which is dedicated to nonprofit leaders who are passionate about making a difference. I'm your host, Haley Cooper, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on a journey of growth, inspiration, and transformation. At Lead with Heart, we believe that leading with heart means embracing empathy, compassion, and authenticity in every aspect of our work. It's about putting people first, fostering genuine connections, and creating a positive impact that goes beyond numbers and metrics. In the nonprofit world, it can often feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. The challenges are immense and the road can be lonely. But here, you're not alone. This podcast is a community where we support each other, share our stories, and learn together. Each episode will dive into personal and professional development topics tailored specifically for nonprofit leaders. From innovative fundraising strategies and effective team management to self-care practices and leadership insights, we're here to provide you with practical strategies that you can apply to your life and work. My goal is to empower you, elevate your leadership, and engage your heart in all that you do. I want to help you navigate the unique challenges of the nonprofit sector with confidence and resilience, so you can continue to create meaningful change in the world. So whether you're driving to a meeting, taking a break, or winding down for the day, tune in and join us on this journey. Together we'll discover what it truly means to lead with heart. Thank you for being here. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is your host, Haley Cooper, and I am very excited today to have Stephanie Sloan from JLC Systems. She specializes in transforming chaos into clarity for nonprofits and associations. As a process expert, Stephanie will dive into your organization's key workflows and systems, ask the right strategic questions, and she says, okay, it's a lot of questions. Sometimes you need those to get to the bottom of it. Pinpoint breakdowns and identify solutions. She understands how critical tech systems are to supporting organizational success, ensuring seamless integration and optimal use of technology. She streamlines workflows, creates SOPs, and SOPs are my love language, so I'm excited about this conversation, and implements order, which can significantly increase member retention, volunteer engagement, donors, and overall satisfaction. Well, welcome to the podcast, Stephanie.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here as well, because this is my love language I can geek out on all day. So happy to chat about this all things systems, process, and SOPs. Yay.
Well, we'll see what we can get into in 40 minutes. Maybe we'll have to have a version 2 because, like I said offline, I created a podcast so I could talk about this stuff all day. So let's just dive in. I would love to know your background. How did you get into processes and systems and develop your business for nonprofits and associations?
So, well, my background, my work background, way back when I started out, my first internship job was as an internship at the Kennedy Center. And that kind of grew into my next job was development for a small nonprofit in the DC area. And I worked in that space for probably about 15 or 20 years before I got married, had kids, all of those things. And when I came back into the workspace, I was doing a lot of SOP creation and systems work for small business, online businesses. And I started working a little bit through like how I wanted this whole business of mine to play out and where I wanted to take it. And really started to realize, hey, a lot of my background is in this space. I worked in a contract for an association management company. So I was working with a couple of different associations and turned that light back on in my brain where I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. I like this, the space I know. I understand how these organizations work. And I also understand a lot about how they need to improve things in order to work better. As most of them, you've got a small staff, a skeleton staff of some sort, maybe not even full-time staff. Maybe it might be a few contractors working in different roles. So really started to think about, wow, the lack of SOPs can make or break you in some cases. And the lack of just being introspective about systems and how your processes are working and if they're working for you. So that's kind of the nutshell of my life before this business. And then as I started to really move it in this direction, what my vision is for that. So,
yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I have definitely been in my shared experience of nonprofits who have lacked SOPs, and you just enter an organization and have to sink or swim and figure it out. And sometimes you have awkward conversations or things aren't documented correctly, and it can be messy without those standard operating procedures or like guidelines on how an organization does its work. And I would love to know, why do so many nonprofits struggle with inefficiency, and how do the lack of SOPs and introspection and processes contribute to that problem?
Well, the lack of SOPs is obvious. If you don't have things documented, like what happens if somebody leaves? What happens if somebody can't make it to work and it's right before your annual meeting, or it's right in the middle of a big donor campaign and you've got a fundraising goal at the end of that and nobody knows how to do the job in the moment? So I think nonprofits struggle with efficiency because they don't ever think, maybe it's because they just don't have time. Like a lot of things happen in a firestorm. So you're like, oh, we're doing this and we're moving down this road, and nobody really thinks to document how we did it. The SOPs are really a low-hanging fruit. I always tell people that this is not hard. Just take the one thing that is the most important to your staff and the most important to your mission and make sure it's documented. Maybe it's volunteer onboarding. Maybe it's how your volunteers and your committees work with your staff. Just document it, get it all on paper so that everybody understands what's happening and, why it's happening. And that piece of it is, like I've said this 1,000 times, it's not rocket science, right? We're just writing some stuff down. Then there's the introspection piece. And I think that's really where a lot of places fall down. It's like you might have a documented SOP, but if you're not regularly going back and looking at that, I would say at least every 6 months to go and say to your staff and your committees and your board, is this still working for us? Maybe there's a new part of your CRM or your donor management system that has a new feature and you're not using it. So you need to tweak your SOP a little bit so that you can really leverage those resources that you're spending a lot of money for. Most nonprofits, the biggest part of their tech budget is going to be that donor management system. And if you're not optimizing how you're using it, that can be a problem. It just leads to it exacerbates itself as it goes. So you really want to make sure you're reevaluating things as you go. So, and I think also the introspection piece is difficult for nonprofits. It's mission oriented. It's very relational oriented organizations typically. And when you have relational organizations, having to talk to somebody about how they're doing a process and how they could make it better is sometimes really uncomfortable. So it's really finding a way to work with that organization to say, hey, how can we do this in a way that you understand that we're not criticizing you, but we're working towards the goal of being more efficient.
Yeah, I agree. And I had someone on the podcast, Kristen Harrington, and we talked about this idea of firefighting versus fireproofing. And I think a lot of nonprofits are in this state of reactivity, especially when they're starting and we just got to move, we just got to go. And then it's all in one person's brain of how the nonprofit operates. And then you come to this point of, oh, we need to grow, but how do we actually get to this point? And that's where the fireproofing comes in, because you have to be able to have documented along the way how you got there, and then document how you were going to grow in the future. And who are those key people that are involved in those processes. And when you're talking about a standard SOP, could we just break it down in like simple terms? Like, what is a standard operating procedure? And I write case for supports for organization, and I have a specific outline of like key things that should be involved in how you communicate externally about your organization. So SOPs are almost like an internal communication tool. So what is it, and what are some of the key things that should be included in an SOP?
Well, for me, when I'm creating it, I mean, it can be as simple as just write down the steps of what we need to do. At the very basic, it should be that, right? But when you really want to develop it to make it make sense to the end user, you want to provide links to whatever software system that they're using. If there's logins that they need, that should be included as part of the SOP, where they get the logins, especially if you're trying to onboard a volunteer and they need an SOP to do a certain task. The last thing you want is for them to have to come back to you and be like, well, I don't know how to log in, or I can't get this. So I typically have a prerequisite section where I'll list out all the things that they need before they can even get started, so that they're not halfway through and frustrated because they don't have what they need. And then it's just really an overview of the process. Typically, I will write that out. So steps 1 through 5, this is what we're doing as a general overview in each part. And then I go into the detail of, okay, so you go into the donor management system and you're going to go to this module and you're going to click here and and it gets as granular as click on this and change this and make sure this is toggled on or toggled off, so that somebody who has never worked in your system before can actually get in and do it. And I've actually had this happen where I've had an organization where I had to step in at the last minute and I never worked in this system before. So I'm pretty techie. I can figure that out, but you never want to put somebody in that position where they're just flying by the seat of their pants, trying to figure something out on the fly. Much better to have it almost over documented, so that the first time they do it, they're like, oh, this makes perfect sense. I'm in there, I'm clicking, I'm doing what needs to be done. And then I usually put a checklist at the end that says, make sure you've done X, Y, and Z, and you can check that off to make sure that you've completed every part of the task. And then always put the date of when it was last evaluated. So that's my standard SOP, everything that I include in it. And of course, every organization is different. But I think having those pieces really covers all your bases. Sometimes people will say to me, like, this is way too granular. But again, you want to put yourself in the position of a person who's never seen it before and has never had to walk through this process, because it can happen that way. So
yeah, I definitely agree. And I sit on I'm a past board chair and now committee member of an organization called Orange County Nonprofit Professionals Network. And the one who kind of was Young Nonprofit Professionals, revamped it, Victoria Torres. She was actually the first episode and also wrote the foreword of my book. She is a good friend, but she developed all of the SOPs for our organization and it's in a Google Drive. And once you join the committee or the board, like, you literally know how to operate the committee. And it's so helpful now that I'm on the network committee. I just go into the folder. It has the templates of the emails I need to send to remind those that are hosting events, how we communicate with marketing, how we communicate with resources, how we post on social media, like what the follow-up plan is. Like, it is all laid out there, and it's for each committee and the executive committee and how you document minutes and everything. And it's just so helpful to have, yes, you can go out, ask clarifying questions, but it's so helpful to have that as a base of, oh, this is how we operate.
yeah. And it's so important too, like when you're a volunteer, like they rely heavily on volunteers. Well, all nonprofits do. I don't know if you're an association or a member organization or a nonprofit with a mission statement, like volunteers are the lifeblood. And if you get people who are interested and want to be on a committee and you can't plug them in immediately to, here's how we run, here's how we operate, here's how you contact the chair, and here's your 10 assignments, and here's how you do them, then they're kind of like, well, do you really need me or do you not need me? I mean, just tapping into that volunteer urge when somebody raises their hand and says, yeah, I want to help, and you can't task them immediately, then you kind of might lose them in the shuffle. And a few weeks down the road, if they still don't have a job, then, they might lose interest or just hit the road. So that's not what you want for sure.
Yeah. So like in the example that I put, like obviously Victoria put in a lot of time and effort in making sure that our Google Drive is like very sophisticated. But I think a lot of organizational leaders think that taking time to evaluate processes and document them using SOPs is too time consuming or not worth the effort, or they're like, well, just do it. We'll figure it out. It's in our head. How would you respond to that concern?
Well, my first response is always like, what happens when the person that does this task either leaves or can't be at work or whatever? Like, that institutional knowledge is in their brain. If you don't get it out and onto paper in some way, shape, or form, you could really lose out, and it could make or break an organization. A lot of times when there is a big upheaval or change or something like that, it can make you look bad on the stage with your members and your donors, like where people are saying, well, what's going on with these people? The website's not up to date, and I'm not getting any emails anymore, and their calendar is 3 months out of date. So those are the things that people are looking to, or I sent in a donation, but I never got a thank you. So the little things like that, you don't want to lose track of, because they can really stall your momentum and really make your credibility go down if you're not really paying attention and people aren't able to pick up the slack. That's just when somebody leaves, that's a big issue. But there are other parts, like if you don't reevaluate things on a regular basis and you're not looking at tasks from a critical standpoint, you could be repeating the same thing over and over again where your system or your process is inefficient, but you just keep doing the same thing. I like to use this example of when I was in college. This was part of a communication class that I was taking, and I'll never forget this example. It's talking about having a family recipe that was passed down generation to generation, and 3 or 4 generations down the road, it was for roast beef. And so the recipe said you cut off the ends of the roast, you put it in the pan, you season it, put it in the oven. And so 3 generations later, somebody finally is like, why do we cut the ends off? Like, why are we doing this step? Nobody really knew. Like, it went back 3 generations to great grandmother. And she's like, oh yeah, when I used to cook that, we had a small roasting pan. And so I'd always get this big piece of meat. It wouldn't fit. So I cut the ends off. And fast forward 3 or 4 generations, and we're still cutting the ends off a roast because we never asked the question of, why do we do this step? So for organizations, especially with small staffs, if you're not asking questions like, why is this a part of this process? You really could be doing something that just doesn't make sense. And then repeating that for however long it takes before you reevaluate. So that was one of the other things that I really try to stress to people is, I know it's a pain to go back and look at this, but it's critical for that reason and others. Thinking about like repeatable tasks and things like that. And also when you're talking about evaluating processes and documenting things, being funding ready, I think, is a big part of this. So I think it was Michael Randall who was on your podcast a few weeks ago talking about McKinsey grants and how a lot of the stuff, he had done some work and study on what types of organizations were receiving these type of funding. And really, it's an organization that's poised to move forward once they get the funding. It's like we take the ball and we run with it, as opposed to we get the funding and then we figure out a lot of other things. And systems and processes are a big part of that. If your organization isn't running well at that moment, when you receive a grant, you may have to spend some time stalling out and working on how you're going to create processes to support that. And organizations that have that in place and receive the money, they're 5 yards down the road before with the ball in their hand, while you're still back there trying to figure out how to make it work. So that's one other reason why I would say it's just really important.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, that's an important piece that you brought about funding. And I think if a nonprofit is listening to this as a fundraiser, there are ways that you can ask funders for capacity building. If you're like, oh crap, I don't have SOPs or the infrastructure yet, there are ways that you can work with funders to help build out that infrastructure and either get the expertise in the room to help you. So it takes the load off of you. Obviously, you still have to be involved in the process because you hold the brain knowledge of how the organization operates. But also, it goes back to, and when you're talking about funding, it helps you become more accountable and transparent with the money and how your organization is operating. And I think just documentation of everything is key, and then holding each other accountable to how the systems are operating, and then asking those generative questions of, is this serving us well now? like it did in the future? Or how could you evolve the processes to meet the moment that you're in now?
And as far as like, I would say an action step in that area is like, it can be overwhelming when you're thinking about it. Like, well, we have so many processes, but just as an organization, choose one. Choose the one thing that you think is the most impactful to your organization and document that one. Start there and start small. Again, it doesn't have to be this giantly, very long process, but you can just start small, pick one thing and document it and get it optimized. So,
yeah. And we were talking about this idea of survival mode or like firefighting or fireproofing a little bit earlier. But I think many organizations, like we said, operate in this like reactive mindset and not proactive mindset, maybe because of like scarcity or just a mindset of whatever it is. But what are some of the significant risks that you've seen of staying in that cycle? And how can evaluating processes help to overcome that mindset? Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs. Helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more.
I think one of the most significant things when we're talking about that survival mode situation is staff turnover. Nobody wants to work and sit in dysfunction day after day because it's frustrating. As you, like, I'm sure you've experienced your share of that. It's just an uncomfortable place to be, and people don't stick around for very long. So I know that staff turnover you've talked about on your podcast a lot. It's a huge issue, and I think you threw out a number the last time I was listening. It's like 1.5 to 2 times annual salary to get somebody in and up to speed and replace them. And to me, that would be enough to just be like, oh gosh, like this has got to be our number one thing. It's keeping staff in place, keeping them happy by having systems and processes where everybody's on the same page. I think a lot of what you run into when you don't have that is you got some lane changing going on where you've got maybe a few staff and you've got committees and nobody really knows who's in charge of what. So that could lead to a lot of stepping on toes or frustration among staff. Well, we thought you were doing this, or we thought you were doing this, or nobody's doing it, which is like the worst case scenario, right? So you're wasting time on both your volunteers and your committees and your staff time. And it can really just lead to a lot of frustration. And generally, people don't like to work in that kind of place. I think another risk that you run into outside of staff turnover is credibility. You don't want your organization to be seen as dysfunctional because your volunteers, your donors, they can see that or they can sense it. I think there's a little bit of a cultural thing that happens behind the scenes where people just can sense that something's not quite right. And that can be a challenge as well. I could go on for days. Like we could talk about inconsistent experiences from donors. If I make a donation, I get a thank you and I get put in a cycle to nurture me as a new donor. And then sometimes they don't. So that inconsistency can create problems down the road too.
Yeah, and I think like you're saying, yes, it leads to frustration within a team, or maybe everyone is doing their own thing because they think, oh, this is how we're going to get there. But that's not actually how the leader had envisioned getting there. But they didn't have any guideposts or processes of how to get there. So you have to figure it out on your own. And then that's where the conflict can come in, because either you feel alone, you don't feel valued, you feel like you're doing it all yourself because no one is on your team, because no one told you how the nonprofit operates. And I also think, like I always say, fundraising is an inside job, because that internal structure and communication is where donor retention starts. Like you said, if you're getting inconsistency, donors are going to feel that, right? If they're just getting a standard acknowledgement letter or not even that, they're going to feel that. And that starts with those internal processes of, okay, we're going to acknowledge our donors in 48 hours and they give X amount of gifts, they're put into this, and a lot of it can be automated too, right? With technology. Like I partner with DonorBox, they're a sponsor of the podcast, and you can automate that. You can set it up where when someone donates, the thank you page and the sequence is there, right? And yes, there is still some humanality to it, right? Because you're the one that has to set up the automation and make sure and check that it's still working effectively or updating the thank you based on what the campaign is. But I think that's where a lot of people get stuck too, is they're like, well, we have to do it all ourselves. But there are ways that you can use technology to help streamline some of those processes.
100%. And that's part of the evaluation, right? It's like, for example, DonorBox, like we have this, it has these features. And if you're not using one of the key features, then you have to ask yourself why, and then try to reevaluate your process so that you can automate where you can automate. Because as you know, staff time is an issue and all of the stuff should be with the advances we have now. I did fundraising way back when we actually mailed letters to people.
That still is number one.
Exactly. It's just amazing to me what was done like that way, but I'm just dating myself there. But yeah, making sure that you're utilizing all the features of every part of your donor management is important, but also just having that laid out between your staff and your committees and who acknowledges what, just so there's no overlap. And this happens with events too. Like you might have a committee that's working on an event and then your staff's wondering, well, I think everything's ready for this event, but I'm not really sure. And you get that he said, she said thing where that leads all the way back to staff not necessarily feeling the love because they're like, this is dysfunctional. I'm trying the best I can and I'm going to leave because I can't deal with this anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we touched on this a little bit, but are SOPs just for large organizations? Is that a misconception? And if it is, how can small teams benefit from process evaluation and documentation?
Yeah, it's definitely a misconception. I think a lot of times it happens because larger organizations, they might have the staff so that they can go in and create these SOPs and they just have a different structure. But when you're a smaller organization and you might not even have full-time staff, you're working volunteers, maybe a couple contractors, that kind of thing. Having SOPs that I've been told, oh, that's really not that important. We know what we're doing. You might know what you're doing, but if you leave, then nobody knows what we're doing, or your volunteers can't get plugged in and they're so important. So I always tell people, yeah, it's the lifeblood of your organization, especially if you have big dreams. If you're an organization and I don't know anybody like this, if you're an organization that doesn't want to grow and wants to just stay in their little box and do their thing, that's great. You might not need SOPs because everybody knows how to do the process. But most organizations I know, their mission is bigger than that and they're thinking bigger than that. And so they want to get to a point where they're expanding on mission-related initiatives and they're expanding their staff and they're hiring people to do things and they've got more volunteers and events and things happening. And that's when it's really the most critical. If you don't have these things in place, again, I think I sound like a broken record saying this, but if you don't have it, you don't have it. And it can be the make or break. You can't grow from 2 people to 4 without really understanding what everybody does and who's in their lane and making sure it's written.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, I've had over the last 3 years, CEOs reach out and be like, Kaylee, I am planning my retirement or like my second life after nonprofits and I need to start succession planning. And I'm like, okay, well, what have you done? And they've done nothing. And so now they're like scrambling to be like, well, how do I onboard this person? How do I train them? And so when you're developing these SOPs, where do they live? Do they live in a Google Drive, a Dropbox? And who needs to be in, what tools can you use to house them? And then who needs to be in the room or in the process to document these processes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes to Google Drive or wherever your organization has their shared documents. So It can be Dropbox. It can be a Google Drive. It can be a space in AWS. Like wherever your organization keeps files that everybody shares is where they should be. And then somebody needs to be in charge of making sure that they're up to date and organized pretty well. That's probably the person that needs to be working with that person. So as you're developing like a succession plan, so to speak, it's okay every day. And I recently offboarded a client. So I did this for like a month straight. Like everything I did, I was recording myself doing it. And I always tell people, you can even use ChatGPT. I do a recording of myself doing a task. I'll run it through a transcript provider or like Descript or something like that. And then I feed it into ChatGPT and give it an example of what I want it to look like in the end. And it can also pull out like step by step what I'm doing. And then I go back in and refine everything and make sure that if there's screenshots that need to be in there, that they're in there, just to keep it as tight as possible and as descriptive as possible. So I would say, that's one tool that can be used. I know a lot of people have used, and the name is, I think it's Scribe is another option, but that can get expensive, where you record yourself doing something, it takes screenshots and creates an SOP for you, which is another way to do it. But again, I don't think that's really necessary unless you're making 1,000 SOPs. That might be time saving, but I think for most organizations, just doing it in the way where, you either just list it out, describe the process, or record yourself and go from there. And I think you asked me who needs to be involved, and it really needs to be somebody who is more of an operations mindset kind of person. I think a lot of organizations overlook that sometimes, where they don't have somebody on staff that really has that operational brain, where they're thinking about not only just how a process is done, but can we do it better? And having that person, if you get one of those, it's a really cool thing to have within your organization, because it can really bring that perspective to, and I'm not saying that nonprofit folks don't have that, but it is kind of a mindset of operational kind of thought processes. And if we do it this way, how is that going to look down the road? Or how does it affect other aspects of the organization and communication with the board or volunteers or however? So.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think that's where you can also bring in a consultant to help, one, start the process, but also train someone within the organization to have that mindset. Because I think some people just operate that way, but I think it is a learned skill as well. And I'm like thinking as you're mentioning Scribe and ChatGPT, I'm like, maybe we should create a system just for nonprofits to create their own SOPs, like some sort of tool to be able to do it that is affordable for nonprofits, but also helps them be able to deliver on their mission in a more impactful way. So how do you help your clients achieve success? And what is your method to help them achieve organizational efficiency?
Yeah, so I've developed something what I call the impact method, born from my brain and how my brain walks through evaluating a process. And impact stands for investigate, map, prioritize, act, codify, and train. And you can learn more about it on my website at some point. But really, the process just walks people through where their biggest bottleneck is. And that's the investigate phase. And we spend a lot of time in that place where a lot of times people will come to me and be like, this is where we're falling down, but it's not really the exact place they're falling down. It's investigating all the parts around that maybe contribute to what they thought was the problem, but maybe the problem is a few steps beyond that. So investigating that and really mapping out how we're going to fix the problem, whether the workflow needs adjusted, or is there a way we can do something within their CRM or donor management system, or however they use to keep track of members and that kind of thing, what that looks like. Do we need to map out a different solution using that? And then really working with leadership after we've identified everything. Okay, here's the list of 5 things that are a problem, which is the most, and prioritizing that. Because a lot of times budget-wise, I would love to sit and do 5 things. Probably maybe only 3 are really going to be the most impactful and can fit into your budget. So we go down that road. And then it's just acting on everything that we've talked about. Codifying it is really just creating those SOPs. And then the most important piece, I think, is training the people who are going to be doing this work on a regular basis this is the process that we're going to use. And this is what came out of this entire introspective period where we evaluated everything. And there might be some feedback between them and me in terms of, well, I don't like this, or can we tweak something? And maybe that happens then. And there's always some Voxer access to me after the fact. If there's a bottleneck or something comes up that, hey, this isn't working, we can tweak a few things in terms of the SOPs and things like that. But just training people who are going to be left holding that process and doing it on a daily basis to make sure everybody's on the same page. And also training leadership in terms of, this is how we do this. When we have a new volunteer, this is who needs to get the information and work the process from there. Because a lot of times people forget that step. And then, you have well-meaning people who love your organization and they come in left field from your process and because they don't know. So having them start at the top and say, okay, this is how we do this, and this is who you need to contact, and this is what the process looks from there. So
I love how you have taken such a complex system or process and made it into something that is simplified, in the impact method. And obviously there's a lot of details and things that go into it, but it is very tangible to people when you put it into that perspective. And if someone is listening to this podcast and they're at the end of the episode and they're like, dang it, now I have to go start an SOP, go write it down. What is one step that you would recommend for them to take today?
I would say action step-wise, I would start small. Really put some thought, get your heads together. What is the one thing that can make or break us? What do we absolutely have to have tightened up, buttoned up, written down so that if we all cease to exist tomorrow, that this organization's mission can move forward? And start there. It's that simple. And it doesn't have to be bells and whistles. Write some things down and make sure that everything is documented for that process. And then move on to the next one. Just, what is it? The phrase about eating an elephant, one bite at a time. So there is a lot that goes into your organization, and you can get overwhelmed by looking at, we got to create SOPs for everything. No, not today. You can do one and then do the next one. And then always keeping in mind that prioritization of what is the next thing that is the most important thing.
So good. Well, if people want to find you and learn more about the work that you do, and I know you have some resources to share that we'll link to in the show notes, but where can they find you?
My website is jlcsystems.com, and you can find out information there and send me an email from there as well. So I look forward to hearing people. I think it'd be awesome. I love to talk about this stuff. I could probably talk even further.
Well, we might have to have a second episode to dive deeper into some of the processes because this is more high level, but I loved every minute of it. I, like you, could talk about this all day. I know that our listeners will take a lot of good nuggets of wisdom from it. And just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I loved being here. I appreciate you having me. So.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.